Chosen one, you have no idea who you really are. And I do not mean that as flattery. Some of the things you have used as evidence against yourself may have been misread for years. The exhaustion you call weakness, the sensitivity you call overthinking, the fog you assume means you are becoming less capable. You walk into a room and notice what nobody says. You hear the pause behind a sentence. You feel when the mood changes. You can solve a problem for someone else in minutes, then sit alone with your own life and struggle to see the next step. That contradiction has followed you for a long time. Think about your life. Who gets called when something goes wrong? Who listens when everyone else needs to unload? Who keeps functioning while carrying thoughts that never belong to them? Very often, chosen one, that person is you. The strange part is that you may not recognize it as weight anymore. You have carried it so long that it feels normal. You solve tomorrow before today is finished. You replay conversations after everyone else has forgotten them. You prepare for problems that have not happened yet, because being prepared feels safer than being surprised. Some of what you call personality may actually be adaptation. Some of what you call responsibility may be accumulated pressure. And some of what you call strength may be a survival pattern that stayed long after the crisis ended. There is a name for this: the invisible load. It hides inside unfinished decisions, constant monitoring, and emotional residue. It appears when another person leaves the room, but their mood stays inside your mind. Ask yourself one question. After a difficult conversation ends, does the conversation keep going inside you? Do you rewrite what you should have said? Do you carry their disappointment as if it were still your task? If the answer is yes, you are looking at the pattern. This does not mean you are weak. It means you may have trained yourself to keep holding information after the moment has passed. Your attention stayed on duty. Your mind kept collecting open loops. Eventually, the person carrying the load became the person you think you were. Carrying is a role. It is not your deepest name. So look at your life with curiosity, not shame. What if the heaviness is not proof that you are becoming less capable? What if too many things have simply remained inside your attention at once? That question matters because the next kind of burden does not feel emotional. It feels like distraction. It feels like low motivation. It feels like becoming tired when you sit down to do something important. Let this land. You may have judged yourself for the symptom without naming the load underneath it. If you see the pattern, say it simply. I see the pattern. Because once the load has a name, it stops being your identity. Next, we separate what is truly yours from what you have been carrying simply because you were strong enough to notice it. Chosen one, the invisible load does not always arrive as pain. Sometimes it looks like a normal day. You answer messages. You remember what everyone needs. You solve small problems before they become visible. But inside, your mind may be carrying unfinished signals at once. A conversation you need to have, a decision you keep postponing, a family member you are worried about. None seems enormous alone, but together they occupy space. Then something strange happens. You can scroll for an hour. You can help someone else. But when you sit down to do the one thing that could change your own life, your energy drops. Your focus disappears. Most people call that laziness. They say they lack discipline. They tell themselves they have lost their edge. But that explanation is too simple. A crowded mind does not always feel crowded. It often feels resistant. Meaningful work requires depth, and depth asks you to close other doors for a while. A mind trained to monitor everything can resist that closing. So you push harder. You build another routine. Then the same resistance returns. The problem stays because the explanation was never accurate. This is the first breakthrough. Exhaustion is not always evidence of weakness. Sometimes it is evidence of accumulated carrying. The question changes. You stop asking, "Why can I not handle my life?" You begin asking, How many lives am I trying to handle at once? You do not need to become cold. You need discernment. Caring is not the same as carrying. Supporting someone is not the same as taking permanent responsibility for their emotions. Here is a simple way to begin. Imagine 3 columns in your mind: mine, shared, never mine. Mine includes your choices, your words, your boundaries, and your effort. Shared includes responsibilities that truly belong to more than one person. Never mine includes the reaction of another adult, the opinion of another person, and outcomes you cannot control. When 10 problems begin running through your mind, place each one somewhere. Mine, shared, never mine. You are teaching your attention that not every signal deserves permanent residence. That may feel selfish at first, but rest is not abandonment. Boundaries are not betrayal. Leaving another person responsibility with them is not a failure of love. Many chosen ones confuse usefulness with worth. They fear that carrying less means mattering less, so the load stays even when the original reason for carrying it is gone. Look carefully at that fear. Your value was never measured by how exhausted you could become without complaining. There is another way to be strong. It knows what belongs to you. It knows when to act and when to release. The invisible load loses power when you stop treating every thought as an assignment. You can notice a problem without adopting it. You can love someone without becoming responsible for every outcome. And when space returns, something surprising may return with it. Your energy was not the only thing buried under the load. Your clarity was buried there too. Why can you sometimes see everything with precision, then hours later feel foggy and disconnected from the same mind? Carrying explains part of it, but not all of it. There is another pattern underneath your sensitivity, and once you see it, you may stop calling yourself too much. Chosen one, sensitivity has probably been one of the most confusing parts of your life. You notice small changes. A face tightens, a voice becomes colder. Someone says they are fine, but something in you registers that they are not. For years, you may have called that overthinking. Other people may have called you too sensitive, so you learned to doubt what you noticed. But ignoring a signal is not the same as learning what to do with it. You do not need to believe that every feeling is a spiritual message. Start with something grounded. Some people are highly attentive to tone, expression, timing, silence, and emotional change. The problem begins when perception becomes possession. You notice that someone is upset. Then you wonder if you caused it. You replay your words. You change your behavior. You begin managing a problem that may never have belonged to you. What started as information becomes responsibility, and responsibility becomes weight. Sensitivity without boundaries becomes exhausting. You receive a signal, but you do not let it pass through. You keep it, you analyze it, then you carry it into the next room, the next task, and sometimes the next day. Notice is not the same as carry. Understand is not the same as rescue. Love is not the same as absorb. This is the second breakthrough. The problem may not be that you perceive too much. The problem may be that you never learned what not to keep. You do not have to become less caring. You only need a gate between perception and ownership. When you notice something, pause before you interpret it as a duty. Ask yourself, is this mine to respond to? Is this mine to observe? Or can this pass through without becoming part of my inner world? Take a moment now. Let your shoulders drop. Notice your jaw. Notice your chest. Notice your hands. Do not force anything to change. Just observe where your body is holding tension. Then ask quietly, what am I holding that did not begin with me? You do not need an immediate answer. The question reminds you that what you feel does not automatically belong to you. Maybe you are holding the fear of a parent. Maybe you are holding the disappointment of a partner. Maybe you are holding pressure from people who expect you to remain reliable. Let the question create space. Absorption says, I feel it, therefore I must carry it. Discernment says, I feel it, therefore I can decide what response is actually mine. You can listen without entering another person's fear. You can support without becoming the solution. A boundary does not remove love. It gives love a shape that can survive. If this is landing, say it simply. I release what is not mine. Every time you release what does not belong to you, attention returns, energy returns, space returns. Sometimes, a part of your mind begins to return too, a part that feels lighter, faster, more curious. Think back to who you were before you became so careful, before you learned to scan every room, before responsibility became your permanent posture. There may have been a younger version of you who imagined freely and trusted curiosity before fear demanded certainty. Where did that person go? Most adults say, I grew up, but growing older may not explain the whole change. The version you remember may be buried beneath years of monitoring, adapting, carrying, and filtering yourself for everyone around you. When we follow that question deeper, we reach a gap that may explain why you feel intuitive in one moment and foggy in the next. That gap has a name. But first, remember who existed before the world became this loud. Chosen one, think back to who you were before you became so careful, before you learned to scan every room, before responsibility became your permanent posture. There may have been a younger version of you who followed curiosity without needing permission from fear. Maybe you drew for hours. Maybe you built things from nothing. Maybe you asked questions until adults became tired of answering them. You could disappear into an idea because your attention still knew how to stay with wonder. That younger self was not perfect, but something about that mind was freer. It moved before judgment arrived. It explored before comparison entered. It did not turn every possibility into a risk. Then life became louder. Expectations arrived. Disappointment taught you caution. Responsibility taught you to monitor more than one thing at once. And slowly, the open mind became a guarded mind. Most people explain this with one sentence: I grew up. But that explanation may be incomplete. Growing older can bring wisdom, but it can also bring habits of constant checking and second-guessing. So consider another possibility. What if you are not trying to create a new self from nothing? What if you are trying to regain access to capacities that once felt natural? This is where another pattern appears. I call it the receiver gap. It is the distance between what something deep inside you seems to recognize and what your everyday mind can reliably organize into clarity. You know this gap. One morning the answer is obvious. You can see the pattern. You can feel the next move. Then another day arrives, and the same problem seems buried under noise. The information may not be gone. Your ability to receive it clearly may be inconsistent. That distinction changes the question. Instead of asking, why am I not wise enough? You begin asking, what condition helps me hear what I already know? And there is something I want you to hold here. Researchers have spent years studying how different parts of the human brain cooperate, specialize, and communicate. Some of that work made me look at this spiritual question differently. I am not asking you to turn science into spirituality. I am asking you to notice where two questions touch. Why can a capable person feel deeply connected to their own mind in one moment, then distant from it in another? Later, I am going to show you why a line of neurological research made me look at this entire spiritual question differently. But for now, hold one question. What if the part of you that feels lost was never erased at all, and what changed was your access to it? That question may stir something uncomfortable, because if access can change, then the version of you that has lived in fog is not necessarily the whole story. Maybe you are not beginning from zero. Maybe you are standing near a threshold. You have learned how to survive, endure, and notice what others miss. But survival is not the final form of awareness. There is another condition in which attention is not always defending, monitoring, and carrying. There is room for curiosity again. If this feels familiar, say it simply. I am ready to remember. Not because the past was perfect, but because remembering who you were before constant pressure can reveal what adulthood trained you to bury. And before we reach the research, there is one identity we need to dismantle. It is the identity many capable people wear with pride, even while it slowly empties them from the inside. The strong one. Chosen one, becoming the strong one, can happen so slowly that you never remember choosing it. At first, you simply help, you listen, you step in when something goes wrong. Then people begin to expect that version of you. Someone calls because you will know what to do. A family member brings you the problem because you stay calm. A partner leans on you because you can carry more. Over time, usefulness becomes a role, and the role begins to feel like identity. You stop saying, "I do not know." You stop asking for help until you are exhausted. You become good at crisis, because crisis is where everyone trusts you most. The strange part is that strength can become a hiding place. If you are always needed, you never have to ask what you need. If you are always solving, you never have to sit inside your own uncertainty. This is not a criticism, it is a pattern. The ability that protected your family can also train your attention to remain permanently available for interruption. Think of how often you postpone your own work because someone else needs something. Then notice how hard it can feel to protect quiet time for your own calling. You may have mistaken that imbalance for a lack of discipline, but you practiced responding to crisis far more often than you practiced returning to curiosity. That changes a person. There is an old pattern in the story of Moses that matters here. Leadership became so heavy that carrying everything alone was no longer wisdom. The burden had to be distributed. The point is simple. Responsibility without structure eventually reduces the person who carries it. There is also an old Greek word, metanoia. It points toward a change of mind, a turning in understanding. Sometimes the deepest turning is not learning something new. It is seeing an old role differently. Maybe being strong was never the problem. Maybe believing you must always be strong was. One version of strength says, "I can carry anything." Another says, "I can recognize what no longer belongs in my hands." One version earns love by being useful. Another receives love without performing for it. One solves every future in advance. Another trusts that some answers can arrive when they are needed. Chosen one, you may need to grieve the version of yourself that never received permission to be unproductive. The version that could not rest without guilt. The version that believed play had to be earned. Grief does not mean you reject who you became. That strong self carried you through seasons that required endurance. Honor that. But do not build your entire future inside the posture that helped you survive the past. There is more of you than your endurance. Sit with that for a moment. Let your breathing soften. You do not have to fix anything right now. You do not have to prove that you deserve rest. Ask yourself what would happen if you were unavailable for one problem that another capable adult could solve. Notice the discomfort. That discomfort may reveal how deeply responsibility became linked with worth. But here is the threshold. Carrying less solves only half the problem. You can set boundaries. You can stop absorbing every room. Yet you may still wake up with the same fog, the same hesitation, and the same gap between what you understand and what you can consistently act upon. That is where the next revelation begins. Understanding the pattern is not the same as changing the condition that keeps recreating it. Why can you hear truth, recognize yourself in it, feel relief in this moment, and still return tomorrow to the same reduced state? The answer is not another demand to try harder. Chosen one, here is the question that matters now. Why can you understand all of this, recognize yourself in it, feel relief as you hear it, and still wake up tomorrow functioning from the same fog? Why does insight sometimes remain insight instead of becoming movement? Why can a message feel life-changing at night, then seem distant by morning? The missing piece may not be another idea. It may be the condition of the receiver. You know, boundaries matter. You know, rest matters. You know, you cannot control every outcome. Yet knowing these things does not always make them available when you need them most. That is the frustration. You are not empty. You are saturated. You collect insight. But when pressure rises, old patterns can return before conscious understanding has time to speak. So, you blame your faith. You blame your discipline. You tell yourself that if you really believed what you know, you would live it perfectly. But knowledge and integration are not the same thing. A person can know a boundary and still freeze under disappointment. A person can know their direction and still lose access to clarity under pressure. This is the strongest breakthrough in this message. You may not need more revelation. You may need a better condition for receiving what has already been revealed. Carrying less matters, but it is not the entire answer. Release creates space. Then your attention has to become available again. The part of you that recognizes patterns and makes clean decisions needs room to return. This is what the receiver gap has been pointing toward. Earlier, I asked you to remember the younger version of yourself. I also told you we would return to a line of neurological research. We are close to that answer now. But first, the entire message needs to become simple. Here is the why. You spent years confusing what you carried with who you were. The pressure became familiar, so you stopped seeing it as pressure. Here is the what. The path forward is not endless accumulation. It is release, restoration, and learning to receive with more clarity than fear. And here is the who. You are not required to remain the exhausted chosen one. You are not required to make survival your permanent identity. There is another name for the person underneath all of this. The returning self. The returning self keeps the wisdom of experience without carrying every defense it created. This self can notice without absorbing. It can care without rescuing. It can rest without interpreting rest as danger. It can hold responsibility without turning responsibility into worth. And most importantly, it can receive. You have learned how to survive with a crowded receiver. That does not mean you are required to build your future from one. If this is personal, say it simply. I choose restoration, not perfection. Restoration. You do not need to become someone else overnight. You need to stop treating reduced access as your permanent nature. And this is where the question from earlier returns. What happens when the receiver itself is supported? Researchers have spent decades studying how the two hemispheres of the brain specialize, communicate, and work together. The reason I waited until now is simple. A solution only matters when you understand the shape of the problem it claims to address. You now understand the shape. You have felt the invisible load. You have recognized the strong one. You have named the gap between insight and access. Now we can look at the research without turning it into a miracle story. We can ask what it suggests, what it does not prove, and why it became the foundation for a tool built around one specific idea, supporting the receiver. Chosen one. Now we can return to the question I asked you to hold. What happens when the receiver itself is supported? There is a line of research behind this question. Dr. Roger Sperry received the Nobel Prize in 1981 for work involving the specialized functions of the two hemispheres of the brain. The product materials we are drawing from build on that idea. They describe a state of whole brain activation in which the two hemispheres work in greater synchronization. The claim is that clearer cooperation inside the brain may support attention, creativity, and the ability to recognize patterns. That matters because the receiver gap has never been about lacking information. It has been about inconsistent access. The same materials point back to childhood. They describe children as naturally more creative, more flexible, and less trapped inside the rigid patterns that develop later in life. Their argument is simple. Modern life can gradually reduce the kind of integrated mental functioning that once felt natural. Two stories are used to illustrate what that can feel like. One woman from California described years of fog, stress, and the sense that life was happening to her. She had tried different practices, but nothing seemed to create lasting clarity. After using the approach described in the product materials, she reported that something felt open again, as if a blocked channel had cleared. A man from Texas described a different version of the same problem. He carried responsibility for work and family while feeling mentally foggy. After using the same approach, he reported clearer thinking and a stronger sense that his mind was working the way it was supposed to work. These are personal reports. They are not guarantees, but they explain why the team behind the approach kept refining one specific idea. A team led by Dr. Daniel Barone in New York created an 8-minute targeted auditory sequence designed around what the product calls neural sync technology. They call it the genius switch. The physical routine is simple: headphones, eyes closed, 8 minutes a day. The product materials describe the goal as supporting hemisphere, synchronization, and whole brain activation. It is not presented as a meditation requirement. It does not ask you to repeat mantras or follow a complicated daily ritual. It is a digital audio track designed to be used passively for 8 minutes. This is not for everyone. It is for the person who recognizes the receiver gap and wants to explore a specific tool built around that problem. Not because a tool can define your destiny, because a tool can sometimes support the condition in which clearer choices become easier to access. The regular listed price in the product materials is $49. The current offer described there is $39. It also includes 4 bonuses: a guided visualization, a grocery guide, a classic manifestation book, and a 5 habits infographic. The materials also state that access is lifetime and backed by a full money-back guarantee. They also say the current price may increase, so the safest way to treat that is simply to check the official page for the current terms. If you want to examine it, use the official page linked in the description and the pinned comment. Read the details first. Decide for yourself whether it fits what you are looking for. And remember this: the tool is not the transformation. Chosen one. The tool does not replace your inner work. It does not choose boundaries for you. It does not make difficult decisions for you. It does not replace medical care or spiritual practice. A tool can support clarity. The life you build from that clarity still belongs to you. That distinction matters because the deepest promise of this message was never a product. It was identity. You came here asking who you really are beneath the exhaustion, the sensitivity, the fog, and the strange feeling that more of you exists than you can consistently reach. The first name was the carrier, but carrying became so normal that weight began to feel like personality. The second name was the receiver. You can notice without absorbing. You can listen without rescuing. And the third name is the returning self. The returning self is not a fantasy. It is the adult who keeps the wisdom of everything you survived while releasing the defenses that no longer need to control every room. Imagine one ordinary morning. You wake up and do not immediately reach for every problem. Your mind is not holding a courtroom before your feet touch the floor. One priority becomes clear. Someone needs something from you. You listen. You care. Then you decide whether the request is truly yours to carry. You can say yes without resentment, or no without punishing yourself. Then you return to your own work with space. A decision that felt enormous last week now has a next step. That is what restoration can look like in real life. Not becoming superhuman, becoming less crowded. For the person who recognized the receiver gap when we described it, the resource remains in the description and the pinned comment. You can examine it for yourself. But whether you use that tool or not, do not lose the larger truth. Restoration begins when you stop mistaking overload for identity. Now give yourself one quiet moment. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw release. You do not have to force your mind to become empty. Just notice that you are here. Picture a younger version of yourself standing a few steps away. See the curiosity. See the person who could become absorbed in an idea without first asking whether it would impress anyone. That younger self is not handing you magical power. Permission. Permission to be clear again. Permission to be curious. Permission to stop proving your worth through exhaustion. Permission to let another person carry what belongs to them. Place a hand over your heart if that feels natural. Feel the weight of your hand. Notice the breath underneath it. Say quietly, I can receive without absorbing. Again, I can receive without absorbing. Now imagine the younger self stepping closer, not to take you backward, but to remind you that curiosity survived, clarity survived, the part of you that could wonder without fear survived. You are not trying to become who you were. You are bringing what was alive in that person into who you are now. The carrier brought you here. The receiver teaches you discernment. The returning self chooses what comes next. And there is one final thing to release before this message closes. The belief that the weight you carried is the name you must keep. Chosen one, before we close, honor the person who carried you here. Do not shame that version of yourself. Survival was not a mistake. The habits that exhaust you now may once have helped you endure what you did not yet know how to release. Thank the carrier, then let the carrier rest. Release the need to carry every mood in the room. Release the need to solve every future before it arrives. Release the belief that rest makes you less valuable. Release the guilt that appears when you choose yourself. Release the fear that if you stop holding everything together, everything will fall apart. You are allowed to discover what happens when life is not organized around pressure. Here is the simplest truth I can leave with you. You did not become smaller, you became crowded. Crowded with responsibility, crowded with unfinished conversations, crowded with expectations, caution, and the habit of monitoring what everyone else might need. And what became crowded can become spacious again. You do not need to erase your past. You only need to stop confusing the fog with your identity. You are not the weight you carried. You are not the fog you survived. You are allowed to receive without absorbing. You are allowed to rest without disappearing. You are allowed to become clear again. You are returning to yourself. Let that word mean something grounded. Returning does not mean moving backward. It means bringing forgotten capacities forward with the wisdom you have now. The sensitivity stays, but discernment stands beside it. The strength stays, but boundaries stand beside it. The responsibility stays, but it no longer owns every hour of your mind. And the childlike curiosity returns without requiring you to become naive again. This is who you are becoming when the weight is no longer your name. Chosen one, perhaps the greatest revelation was never that you were meant to carry more than everyone else. Perhaps it was that underneath everything you carried, there was always more of you than the weight allowed you to see. More room to hear your own life again. The next time you feel the old pressure return, ask one question: is this mine to carry? The next time fog appears, do not turn it into a verdict about who you are. Treat it as information. Make space. Return to what is yours. And when the old identity says that you must earn your worth through exhaustion, answer it with something simpler. I am not what I carried. I am not what overwhelmed me. I am not required to live crowded. I can choose what stays. I can release what is not mine. I can receive with clarity. I am returning. If those words belong to you today, leave one declaration: I am returning. Then Carry that sentence with you, not as another burden, but as a reminder. The weight was real. It was never your name.